Welcome to Deconstructing Digital, the podcast where we deconstruct the opportunities and challenges faced when digitalising processes for the built environment. I'm your host, Amelia Fletcher-Blackburn, and today I'm joined by Tim Clarke as we talk about legacy IT systems. Tim, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, thank you, Amelia. Hi, my name's Tim Clarke. I'm a senior consultant at CurveTech Group, and I provide consulting services across management and information security.
Excellent. Well, pleasure to have you on the podcast today. So today we're really going to be talking about what it takes to turn outdated IT systems into a competitive edge. So, firstly, we'll start with cloud adoption is often seen as a cost-saving measure. But as we all know, that can be far from the case. So when it comes to starting that cloud journey, how should businesses weigh up the costs and advantages?
That's a very good question. I suppose to take the first point, cloud isn't necessarily cheaper. It does offer advantages, but it's got a different cost model. So I think typically IT was based on you own infrastructure, you run it for a certain number of years and you amortize the costs. And that cost model was fairly well understood. But I think moving to cloud services, you typically don't own the infrastructure. You pay for a service and it's based on a consumption model. And that fundamentally changes how you treat it financially, but also how you need to manage those costs. And I think a lot of businesses, and myself personally working with companies who've gone on that maturity journey, realize quite quickly that if you don't have good processes and procedures around how you consume cloud services, you can very quickly rack up large bills and actually end up spending more than you had typically done. So I think that's one thing to understand. Predictability as well is important, because understanding what you use and be able to forecast that usage actually again helps with the cloud finance models, because if you can commit to certain amounts of consumption, you get varying discounts, and all the big cloud providers provide that sort of discount model. So again, it's about understanding what you want to use and trying to forecast better in order to get the best discounts and manage the costs effectively.
So a really important part of that migration journey is all that preliminary work you do up front. Yeah. Predictive planning, understanding, modeling, so you know what it is you're walking into.
Yes, exactly. And again, you've got so much choice in terms of not just the types of services, but even just trying to run a virtual machine. You've got, different types of disks. You've got different amounts of CPU capacity, all of which comes at a cost. So again, you need to be able to project or predict your workload based on what you use today or what you'll forecast to use. So that's, again, it's a slightly different discipline to just buying something and adding to it over time as you need it. It's better to be able to forecast and predict things.
That's really interesting. So I've never thought about that cloud journey in that way before, is that it's not just an IT piece, but also really important to have your procurement teams involved up front as well.
Yeah.
Because actually the financial impact it could have on your business if that isn't thought through right up front.
Yes. And you're right. It opens up to it requires different skills and, typically just trying to lift and shift IT infrastructure from on-premise to the cloud. You can do that, but you're not necessarily then going to benefit from some of the advantages of the cloud. And one of the big advantages I've seen is it takes away a lot of the drudge work and administrative overhead of just maintaining infrastructure. So doing the patching and keeping things current. If you pay for service, your responsibility for that passes on to the cloud provider. So that actually takes away some of the routine work that IT teams typically did in the past. That is now somebody else's responsibility. But that means that frees up the IT team to do potentially more valuable work. But again, it's the change in the types of skills and the type of work that an IT team does. That's part of the cloud transformation, is actually looking at the skills you will need in the future, not just what you've done in the past.
And that's such an excellent point. So we talked quite a bit there about the costs, the importance of modeling them, understanding them, getting the right people and skill set involved up front to minimize them long term. What do you see as the main advantages as part of this move? You've touched upon obviously that evolution of the skill set, the reduction in some of the work that needs to be done. But are there other key areas from an advantage perspective you'd like to raise?
For moving to the cloud?
Yeah.
I suppose it's the access to services and technology, new technology particularly. I mean, it's a double-edged sword because there's a lot of new capabilities available in the cloud, which you can try for minimal investment, upfront investment. So you can try things and see if they work for you as an organization. That's, again, like I said, double-edged sword because that requires the right skills. And one of the challenges, again, the companies struggle with is keeping abreast of the capabilities that are available in the cloud. And even just trying to stay still is a challenge because particularly Microsoft and Azure, Microsoft and AWS, they introduce new services all the time. They continue evolving their existing services. So that in itself is a challenge, just keeping up to date and making sure that the skills you've got in-house, you'll get the best value or making them the most out of the investment in the cloud. And talking to some training companies, this is one of the challenges they face is just as they're developing training material, the world's changing around them all the time. So they're continually having to evolve and update their training material. And that to them is a challenge, just keeping abreast of the evolutions in cloud capabilities and cloud services. And this is, not even thinking about AI, all of the opportunities that AI is now bringing to the table as well.
Such a great point that you make that around the fact that cloud transformation and move, you have to have the right target operating model wrapped around it in order to be able to benefit from all those new capabilities. There's no point constantly having that dropping if you don't have people with that real thirst for learning and the right mindset, the training material and the wrapper around them, but also the right kind of governance and risk models that sit around it.
Yeah.
What do you see moving as cloud to cloud, a reduction or increase in a company's risk profile?
It's probably net neutral, but it's like I said before, it's probably a different set of risks. It is a different set of risks. So again, it's coming back to good practices, really. You should, as an organization, understand the risks to your business, your operations, sort of commercially, from a security point of view, financially. So it's having the ability to model the risks, ideally before you start to adopt cloud, is understanding where those risks may manifest themselves and then putting in place or choosing the right approaches to mitigate those risks. I'm trying to think of some examples, but I suppose it's, one of the most obvious ones is the data is not necessarily going to be physically under your control. I mean, again, go back a few years or a few decades, a lot of companies ran their own data centers. So they physically, had quite close access to the infrastructure and hence the data that was sort of stored and processed when that infrastructure. Moving to the cloud means that data is then remote. I mean, most companies do it now, so it's not a new risk, but back in the early adoption of cloud, there were some concerns. A lot of companies didn't like that perceived sort of increase in risk by letting somebody else manage the data or manage the infrastructure where that data sat. So I think that mindset has changed now. I suppose the risk now is more about probably a bit more geopolitically as the world's changing. The data probably still needs to reside within certain sort of sovereign regions. So that's, UK government particularly likes the data to remain in the UK, and we're seeing the US in terms of Trump's approach to globalization. That is actually having an impact on hosting applications and data as well. So for the latest legal advice we're getting is it makes things so much simpler if you're dealing with US businesses, is if you're running the actual applications and hosting the data in the US, it just makes the whole conversation a lot easier. And it's also probably preempting some potential tightening in data privacy rules and regulations in the US. So those are the things you need to start thinking about as you move into the cloud.
And do those kind of geopolitical and regional differences therefore increase the complexity and cost of cloud adoption?
Potentially. I mean, you can mitigate that if you plan it correctly and if you can identify where you want to host your services and your data. Most of the large public cloud providers now have very good coverage, so that regionally or even down to a country level, you can pretty much select where you want to run workloads and store data. So that's not so much of an issue now if you can, again, be proactive and identify and sort of think ahead to where you want to run your services. I think, it has changed. Originally, Microsoft particularly used to release sort of new features into a sort of select number of regions. So sometimes you'd have to wait for those to be rolled out to more local regions, but that seems to have changed over the last few years as the presence, particularly Microsoft and AWS, as they've grown globally. They tend to roll out new features to the main sort of parts of the world, Europe, Middle East, America, around the same sort of time. So,
and what do you think are the motivators for having it regionally based? Is there anything around security? Is it purely around data?
Well, there's two things, I suppose. Again, thinking worst case scenario. If in the UK, if we were to be isolated from the rest of Europe, for example, if we've got a lot of data cables that connect us to the rest of the world. And again, there's been lots of new speculation or actual evidence that those undersea cables are being targeted. So again, this is doomsday scenario planning, but worst case scenario, if you have your data in the UK and your customer base is in the UK, the impact of losing a cable or some connectivity to Europe or the US is mitigated if you're able to still work locally. When I say locally, I mean across within the UK. So those sorts of things should be considered. They're pretty extreme in terms of risk and the likelihood of those things happening, but it's a consideration. So I think probably the biggest driver for where you host the data is more regulatory. So the legislation around, data privacy is really what drives where you host the data and who has access to it. Something that's, the UK, most of Europe come under GDPR. The US has got varying degrees of privacy regulation. I think California's got the most stringent, but it seems like that's that level of regulation and oversight and expectation where data is held, primarily personal information or commercially sensitive information. I think that is what's driving where the data is stored.
What's coming apparent from this conversation is how many different things you have to consider when you're working through that cloud adoption journey. So it's not just how much is it going to cost you, but how are you going to model it and procure it so you understand that cost? How do you create a team and a target operating model around that move to the cloud that can be sustained and managed? What's your risk profile you're taking on? What do you need to consider from a regulatory perspective? And then obviously underpinning all of that is your customer base and the people you're trying to serve.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it can be very simple, and it is very simple to just create the subscription and start running servers in the cloud and running applications in the cloud. But there are lots of decisions you can make in terms of even just, not just if you're going to host something in the UK, you've got options then, is it UK North or UK South, or how resilient you want your services to be. So it can be complex, it can be simple, but I think the more you understand what you need for your business and what your customers expect, those help to drive the right decisions. Again, it can be simple, but if you put more thought into it, you're less likely to go down some cul-de-sacs. But I think the skills thing is important. That is, again, something I've observed is where teams have tried to transition from being traditional system administrators and infrastructure engineers moving to becoming cloud engineers. There is a subtle difference in the skills required. It's more the cloud's environments work better if you script things and you've got more consistency. So it's more akin to writing software as opposed to more traditional infrastructure engineers that would be more sort of, I suppose, hands on keyboards or physically working on servers. So it's a slightly different skill set, and that should be able to tee that sort of the training required for the potentially bringing in different skills to help support that transition and the ongoing sort of running a business using cloud services, I think is something that shouldn't be overlooked.
Can we dive into that a little bit more with regards to people and the upskilling and the challenges you can face and then how you can overcome those? It'd be great just to go through not only just the challenges themselves, but any particular tips around how you can overcome them within your organization.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of good, education and training materials online. So there's there's curated courses to take people from having very little knowledge to being quite, expert in the different cloud platforms. So I think like I say, that's something that requires time and space for people to be able to do that. So again, as part of an organization, you need to make it part of the transformation is to make the training available and give people the time and support to do that. But also going back to what I was saying at the start, that understanding the costs and how the cloud commercial models are. Again, that's typically something that you wouldn't necessarily worry so much about in terms of the actual infrastructure engineers or traditional system administrators, but that type of role is very important. And I think that sort of FinOps type role is something that is, a lot of companies benefit from having somebody with a FinOps sort of mindset that focus purely on the cloud environment, because I say it's very easy to lose control of the costs, but there are some, very useful tools and capabilities that allow you to sort of manage and put restrictions and guardrails around what you use and what you spend in the cloud. But having somebody who is aware of the controls and can be responsible for sort of managing the cost base is probably a thing that a lot of companies overlook until they get exposed and realize actually we need to be a lot more proactive in terms of managing the cloud environment. It's not just costs, but it's also the overall governance of it as well. It's easy to lose control and potentially make mistakes that in an environment you control more closely. It's less likely to impact you as an organization. But, a lot of there's been high profile cases where poorly configured cloud environments have been exposed by, hackers or even just researchers looking for vulnerabilities, and they've found backdoors into sort of poorly configured cloud environments and had the potential to, cause data leakage or, cause embarrassment to the companies involved. So again, it's back to education awareness. If people were setting up these environments with the right knowledge and understanding, these things are less likely to happen.
So you've got 3 key areas I've heard there. One is upskilling infrastructure engineers to look at things slightly differently and have slightly different day job ultimately when it comes to managing legacy infrastructure on premise versus that in the cloud. You've got new roles and ways of working, procurement, FinOps, understanding that commercial model, making sure you're commercially protected because high volumes of usage and data can come with a large bill. And the third area is all around that risk management, understanding any potential risk with moving to the cloud, how you protect yourselves against that, and having the right overviews and security principles in place.
Yeah.
One of the things we touched upon earlier, which I think is actually incredibly exciting when we talk about moving to cloud infrastructure, is the services that you start to get available to yourselves. And we talked a little bit about AI. What are you seeing happening with regards to AI capabilities through movements to the cloud?
That's a good question. And I think probably almost answering the question you asked at the start, and taking AI as a sort of almost a case study. There's a risk with any new technology. And I suppose the cloud adoption, we're sort of probably a couple of decades into, the big public cloud providers going cloud adoption. So, but early adopters did struggle a bit there were some disadvantages to being an early adopter. And again, in that experience I had with working with Azure, the whole management portal or the management plane changed, and we adopted it at a company quite early on. And then a few years in, we had to spend quite a bit of time and effort in migrating onto the new management plane because the old one was changing. It was better for us ultimately, but it was, as a business, it was quite an impact. And I see the same with AI. I mean, AI is evolving very rapidly, and obviously a lot of companies start to exploit it, but there's downsides in terms of being an early adopter, in terms of the pace of the evolution. And I think in a year's time, there'll be services and layers on top of AI that will actually help businesses get value out of it more easily than they are today. So AI agents and the ability for generative AI to actually do meaningful tasks, not just be a sort of question prompt type agent, but actually integrated into business processes. That is coming. There's always standards being defined. So that's the next level. And to me as a business, I'll be waiting to identify really clear business benefits and business processes that would benefit me rather than trying to jump in too early. My other sort of concern around generative AI is more the blind faith people have in it, and the potential, the lack of understanding of the risks associated with it, because a lot of the information that is produced via it is very accurate, but it also does contain, or there's also the potential for it to contain misinformation or just be plain wrong. So people need to be aware of the limitations of it, and not just lose control in terms of whatever AI produces is right. There's always got to be that oversight and that governance, and that sort of understanding the provenance of what's been produced. I suppose thinking ahead, my bigger concern is that the more information and content is produced by Gen AI, and I'm thinking, video content and it's multimedia now. Yeah. The more that's out there in the public domain, I think it's going to become harder and harder to actually trust the provenance and find the truth in things, because at the moment it's already an issue. But if you go to trusted websites and trusted, media outlets, there's a degree of fact checking and due diligence that goes on so that you can trust to a certain degree the information that you're reading off certain sites. But I think the more that's pushed out from Gen AI, the harder it's going to be to do that. So it's probably going to start to undermine some of the value of the internet in itself.
The whole concept around it and around hallucinations and how AI can form its own version of the truth based on what it's read. And ultimately its own training, right? You look at humans themselves.
Yeah. The biases that we all have.
Exactly. And that you yourself as an individual will be driven, and the way that you interact with individuals is obviously determined by your education and your background. And it's amazing to hear that actually AI itself will have its own personality, driven by the information that it's read, and potentially the region it's in and the different political environments that are happening within that space, as an example.
Exactly. And that's already happening. We've seen that with DeepSeek, is the training it's being given is based on what the Chinese Communist Party believe. So it's already providing that worldview. But again, you have to be aware of that, because if you ask it certain questions, you'll get, a certain viewpoint, which is not to say it's right or wrong, but it's about understanding. But that's the limitation in that training set that's been used to sort of drive that model.
One of the things I've heard quite a lot throughout this conversation is whole double-edged sword concept. So whilst it's incredible that this movement to the cloud opens up all these opportunities, different services, different ways to integrate, share information, AI, all of it's got to be approached in the right way with the right level of training and understanding for the individuals unlocking those capabilities, because there are risks associated with it. And if not handled correctly, it could potentially be quite damaging.
Absolutely. Yeah. So again, I suppose it's back to the sort of risk management side. It is having that ability to look at new technologies and put them through that risk management exercise or the risk evaluation and say, what does this mean? There are obviously benefits, but there's also, downsides. So it's understanding those and just making sure that the balance is there. Like any risk management process, it's making conscious decisions and making the decisions that fit within the sort of risk profile or the risk tolerance of your organization. So, but it's just that, like I say, it's having a conscious decision and going through that thought process to make sure that you're doing the right things for your business and your customers.
If a new business approached you tomorrow and asked you, how do I start my journey from my on-premise legacy infrastructure to cloud? What are the 3 key bits of advice that you would give them?
I suppose, first thing, do some modeling, and there's very good tools that do a lot of the hard work for you. So understand what you've got today and then allow you to predict and create a sort of template for what it would look like in the cloud to help with the costs. Just reiterating the point about the training and the skills. Just look at the people you've got, look at what the skills you think you'll need in the future and do that mapping and identify if there's gaps in terms of roles or skill sets that we need to address through training or recruitment. And then I suppose, just take it slowly, sort of do test and learn and start with the sort of the low risk stuff, because there's always going to be gotchas and, there's going to be opportunities to sort of learn from mistakes you make. So start small, but, just sort of eat the elephant or one sort of bite at a time approach, really.
Love it. One cloud bite at a time.
One fluffy cloud.
One fluffy cloud. So it's been great talking to you. So you clearly got a wealth of experience. Your learning trajectory at the moment must be so steep as well, because you said everything is continuously moving and changing. What's the one thing you know now that you wish you'd known at the beginning of your career?
Well, it's a good question. And I sort of pivoted my career. So, I mean, my background was actually in civil engineering. So I did that for a few years, but I'd always had an active interest in IT, and a big part of my engineering work was sort of around computers. So I'd sort of pivoted. And I suppose it's not necessarily a lesson learned, but looking back, I've always had that sort of desire to keep learning. I think that's what's interesting about cloud and AI and sort of the technology, technology in general. It's evolving and changing all the time, which just keeps me interested. But, not sure that's really answered the question, but that's...
I think it has. I think the more that I'm doing these podcast episodes and interviews, I think the real common thread between all of the guests when it comes to really embracing digital is, one, you've got to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
2, you've got to have a want and a thirst for learning. And 3, you need to be able to engage people and bring them on the journey as well, and be able to explain to people why it's important to them. So I think what you talked about there is your adaptability, your willingness to learn, your thirst for understanding what digital transformation really means. So I think that's incredible and an excellent answer.
Thank you. Well, I think, just sort of then paraphrasing it back, probably don't feel like you're boxed in, and don't worry about change. I think at the time when I made that pivot in my career, it felt like a massive step, and I was very, unsure if it was the right thing. And I suppose that it's a bit like the squiggly career, if you're aware of that. A career isn't necessarily a straight trajectory, and there's going to be, deviations, but, don't be afraid of those deviations and follow your interests.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I've had my own squiggly career. Yeah. So I love a squiggly career. But Tim, it's been amazing having you on Deconstructing Digital. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And we did it.
Pleasure.
We deconstructed digital.
Thank you.